So before the horizon becomes too obscure, let's see if we can pick out the Heideggerian position against the Nietzschean position. This doesn't seem to be presented anywhere with any closeness, with any of the exactness that it requires. So, what is the injury that Nietzsche is supposed to be doing to Heidegger? Um, we're continuing on from there's several recordings immediately prior to this in the playlist. Um, Heidegger says, so far as I know, only of Nietzsche and Kierkegaard that they may be doing something else beside from philosophy. So remembering Heidegger determines philosophy as metaphysics, and he defines that as theory of the object. Um, so through some fine points, which we won't attempt to rehearse, one has to say that even though Heidegger does say that the Greeks were prior to the subject-object split, and he can show what he means by that. And the subject-object split begins with only with Descartes. This is what he's referring to. That's technical language. There's always subject-object splits in some way throughout the whole tradition, primarily because the Greeks, first and foremost, think of being as something available. In other words, they tacitly hold that something is available to them. So, beginning with the pre-Socratics, or depending on how you say it, Nietzsche says the pre-Socratics, but often it said the pre-Platonics. But he kind of cuts Socrates in half and says there's an early Socrates, and then there's Socrates, the first theoretical man. So I suppose belonging to Socrates, the first theoretical man, is the presentation by Plato's Socrates of the analogy of the broken line with the is that the right title for it? The four points there with the reflection, pistis or direct vision, where we rely on our foot falling on the ground. We assume that we can rely on our natural reflexive intelligence. We assume that what we see is real for the most part, and then the higher split in the soul between episteme, which has more to do with math and number, and on the other hand, substantive analysis by nous. Analysis, or in other words, nous is the same thing as reason proper. The eternal, the access to the eternal. And so all four of those, according to Socrates, are something like pate, or some relation to the word pathos, but in the proper meaning, passion in the sort of early modern tradition, like in Hobbes or so. Passion is not a poetic word there when you say the passions of the moon, for instance. This just means something is acting upon something else. It's passion rather than action. So for Socrates, all four of these points are points of a flowing in or an acting upon the soul. The soul passively receives the datum from these four regions, regions which are differing in kind and in reliability from the gross trash heap of physis or nature, as Heraclitus puts it, or to the high point in nous, where we have access to, as Kant finally puts it, these maxims, which through language we can explain to ourselves the proper code of behavior. Truth as adequation to language, logical truth. So starting with Kant, we flip this around, and Kant says that rather than being passive, all these 4 points are they're creative, um, they're active, they create the thing. So if you take that from the point of view, say from the current analytic philosophy departments, what they'll say is something along the lines of it's basically a kind of modified Lockean argument that there's something excites the eyes. So there's some particles coming into your retina, they float around in the optic loop, and this produces the image. But the problem that they'll tell you is that this makes it as though there were a little man, a homunculus, as they call it, standing behind or as it were, in the place of the neurons, in the sense that all people that deal with the brain today take as take for granted that the neurons are somehow the same as the human being. Like if you're supposed to point to yourself, you're supposed to point to your neurons, basically. Um, this has a problem insofar as neurons are all over the body and not only in the brain. There's a stomach brain, but they're more numerous and more variegated in the brain. That's an issue with the division with Descartes and with against Aristotle, but we won't go into that now. But the main point here is just that it's active. They're saying so it doesn't seem to make sense that there's a little man inside with a sort of binoculars connected to the eyeballs and just behind all this activity, right? That's where the problem comes in of the radical division between the subjectivity and objectivity. How does the whole world come into existence, therefore, which is then in some ways the justification for these jumping off points you get in Nietzsche, which are sort of post-Lockean points of view, because it doesn't make any sense, as Nietzsche says, that the eyes can make the eyes themselves produce the eyes. So in order to distinguish this rest of the tradition from Heidegger, Kant, and Kierkegaard, we should look at how this Kantian position developed about the notion that everything is active rather than passive, as the Greek tradition had it. This develops, as Leo Strauss says, Kant raises his head at the gates of history, as it were. So then Hegel comes in and takes off from there. Basically, these views all more or less link up to, if you want to put it the way people put it today, with you still have an old white man that holds this view, which would be Daniel Dennett, except that he basically drops the rational part. It's not that the rational is the real, it's just that the thing produced by the neurons is supposed to be, according to him, identical to what's really there. So there's no problem with the radical division between something like subjectivity and objectivity, and so in Zizek, what makes Zizek a continental philosopher here is that he still thinks this is rational. You get this kind of a stupid position in Dennett and in Dawkins, for instance, where they pretend that they're straightforward physicalists, where they say just the perception is the same as what it produces through the. Dawkins doesn't even get this far, but in Dennett he gets this far. But then you have to add on, why would that be rational if we're only getting an image which is totally dependent on the sense data, where there's no rational part to that anymore. There's no nous here anymore. There's not even episteme anymore. In other words, there's not even, you have to have a theory to show what number is properly, that 1 is exactly equal to 1, for instance. There's nothing like that. There's just a derivative sort of kingdom within a kingdom, which is supposedly accurate, but it can't supply any rationality in the sense of a maxim of morality, for instance. That doesn't make any sense, but they try to bring it in anyway in ways that are totally unconvincing. Zizek remains, in a way, this is the post-Nietzschean position where instead of taking these positive positions like Descartes, who says, this is my position, this is my system, everybody is a little bit diffident, right? They're not certain about their position. And in Nietzsche, in a way, there's a positive position, but it's such a tricky position that it's all over the place. So Nietzsche says in The Truth and Lies in the Extramoral sense that following some analysis more or less like what I just went through, that there's simply radical division between the subjectivity and the objectivity where they're incomparable, and it doesn't make any sense to say that what comes in could be adequate, could be simply a record produced through the stream of things flowing in through the eyes or whatnot. Um, so let's stop there for a second, and then we'll have to go back in the next recording from this point where we're saying that you can't say that there's except dogmatically, you have to just state it dogmatically that there is a direct connection between those two things.